Okay, this is episode 7 of Narrative Wake, and this is a show sponsored by Esports Pools. And the thing is, Esports Pools doesn't just offer fantasy esports, such as insert all the jokes about TSM and NA players being really good that I always usually like nail pretty well, but then it's the same sort of punchline every time. Like the punchline's like, haha, you believe in things that aren't true. But they also, not a lot of people know this, offer betting. Now, I will go ahead and straight away say, you also, a lot of you who are watching this come from America. I know there are demographics on YouTube, and a lot of you think America's a very free country, but you're actually not allowed to gamble in many states in America, including most of America. Like, there's a lot of federal laws against that. So that's sort of like not having freedom in a way. And so in countries where freedom is allowed, you can actually bet on esports. And so if, by the way, there's a decent crossover here. If you both live in a country that has some level of personal liberty and real freedom and love TSM, so that's still nailing a lot of people. There's a lot of people out there don't understand English. That's why they love TSM. They think, that's fucking, TSM is number one. Like, you know, it's funny to them. They think it's just like sort of weird cultural shit. If you're one of those people, then you're probably thinking, going to be brilliant odds on TSM getting out their group at Worlds, right? And you'll probably be right. The odds will actually probably be pretty good. So even though, obviously, TSM will inevitably fail and not get out of groups, and you'll have to pull out that little black book you all have of 1,000 excuses and either figure out, can one of these be used again, or must we create a new one, and then look to the greatest and the best among you to do mental gymnastics and come up with one of those excuses. Either that'll happen, or you'll actually probably be able to win. So your choice. And again, as always, I believe in personal. Unlike the founding fathers of America and everyone who's run it since then, except that brilliant guy Trump, who I think is going to set everything right if you give him time. Everyone except him, much like them, I just leave it up to you whether you do that or not. I don't tell you to do it. I don't say don't do it. I just say it's available, it's possible, and if you do it, let it be on your own heads. It's not actually copy I read here, believe it or not. I don't actually get sent this stuff by any sort of copy. I come up with it. I make it up as I go.
It shows a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, it does and it doesn't, because sometimes I do things that are better than what people could have come up with. So that's also pretty good. Now, I'm the usual host, Thorin. If you haven't been keeping up to date, I did make a video where I explained fairly conclusively why most people who support TSM and tweet at me are probably developmentally disabled or assholes. Yeah, it doesn't have to be one, you know, one or the other. Now, with that said, in the same week, did sort of get Deficio and Jet on my shows, so can't really fuck with that, can you? Now, that's all. I'm just bigging myself up there. It wasn't even an introduction, was it? But anyway, that's all. In many ways, bigging myself up is sort of all the introduction you need to who I am. So, usual co-host, Kelsey Moser, who last episode, 3/4 of the show, she was represented by A, a still image, no webcam, and B, probably the worst looking still image of her on Google. But I read all the comments. Almost no one commented on it. Almost no one was upset. No one said anything.
It's almost as if a still image of me is more expressive and involved with the conversation than I actually am.
Listen, this is all
pretty impressive. I have a unique gift. You don't get this kind of quality entertainment anywhere else.
This is kind of a Pygmalion situation. It's all about your journey to becoming that person who unlocks their emotions, interacts. Someone who just, when they speak, a smile lights up on their face, and you know what? The whole world smiles back at them. Now, I don't know if that's going to be episode 100, whether it's going to be episode 50. Listen, I'm not a very optimistic guy, so I won't say you'll make it, but I'd like it if you did. So you are Kelsey Moser, despite the Twitter, and which I will refer to on as many occasions as I can. I've got a question. You used to write for the Score Esports, I know, because you used to retweet a lot of your shit. Then you used to write for Yahoo. Again, I also know I had to literally edit an ident just to remove that. I don't know if you noticed that. I've literally had to trim out the part where you say for Yahoo Esports on that video. At the moment, you just write for a few different people, right? How does it work at the moment? Who do you write for now?
Primarily Slingshot Esports and ESPN. So
okay, not bad. Not bad. In the bottom right-hand corner is Inero, and he is the coach for Echo Fox, right? Before anyone thinks there's a joke coming here, there isn't. He has one of the hardest jobs in the world.
What's that?
Well, first of all, explaining to Froggen why sometimes things were his fault. I can tell you, I've known the guy a long time. That ain't easy, you know? He's the sort of guy where he's like, wasn't me. You're like, you're on videotape coming out of the house. Yeah, wasn't me. You're like, look, there's even credit card statements that say you went through a toll booth near there. There's only one entrance in and out. It's like, wasn't me though, was it? And you go, and then he goes, well, I'm better than you at league, so how could it have been me? And you go, fuck, he always comes back to that one, doesn't he? You can't ever beat that one. So it's tough. And then simultaneous to that, you got to go to Keith. You're brilliant at League of Legends. You know how this champion right now is really powerful and AD carries can win the game with it? I believe you could do it. You know, so on the one hand, you're an incredibly rational person. You have to be able to manage delicate politics. And on the other hand, fucking hell, mate, you must be able to sell a story. So, listen, I admire you. I've kind of described, you've got a great coaching range. Exactly, right? See, listen, I have a problem, right? Even my compliments sound like insults. So anyway,
yeah, I'm not really sure if there was a compliment in there, but it was nice.
It sounded
I'll
good.
take it.
In a way, it sounded good, didn't it? You know? So, yeah, as I said, head coach of Echo Fox. Now we'll move around the group to the last person involved here, whose name, every time you say it, part of your brain goes, am I saying that right? And then as you start to think that, you go, who gives a fuck? It's not even a name I've ever heard of, might not even be real. And then you also think, there's more things to think about in life than that. And so that is Abaxial, who is the head coach of Keyed Stars, I think it is at the moment, right? Before that...
Actually, I'm a free agent, but yes, it was Keyed Stars.
Used to be the coach of Keyed Stars, okay? Listen, we'll leave it up to speculation as to how that turned out. Before that, was the coach of INTZ, INTZ. I think it's cleverer. I think it's cleverer to say INTZ because INTZ. I mean, we've all seen him play in international tournaments. That sounds like almost like you're trolling at that point in time, doesn't it? Like my whole team INTZ. Like I fucking bet it does. I bet it absolutely does. And also, here's a pro tip. Coming from CS, so it was relevant in my mind, and I've seen what happens with some of the players in Brazilian League of Legends. So if you're ever going to coach a Brazilian team, right? All they need to do in the game is they talk on like TeamSpeak or whatever it is, and then they play in the game. No one needs to ever type text in the game. So just take off the ability for Brazilians to type text in game. You'll solve so many problems. No one will get banned. We'll have all the best players in the scene. Enough said. I think that's a real tip. Literally, I am actually advocating censorship for the whole Brazilian scene just because I don't want them getting in trouble. Just play the game. You play your game, you're half decent.
Well, you want Twitter as well, right?
Probably should do Twitter as well, you know.
Okay. Well,
it helped.
One day you'll understand the wonders of Caralho, but until then.
Or I might not be alive to understand it. One of the two will happen. So this episode is going to be about North America. So I should warn you at the outset, Abaxial at one point in time was involved with TSM. Now, listen, there's people who've been in Scientology and gotten out. They're totally fine people, and you can talk to them about it, and they'll tell you everything. But B, and this is the contingent point, so I'm just saying, bear this in mind. He just told you he doesn't work for Keyed Stars anymore. Last season, he was going hard as a motherfucker at that Fnatic job. Probably wants to get hired somewhere. I'm feeling like TSM might shit the bed at Worlds. You know, all I'm saying is, just merge the two. So anyway, keep your nose clean. Keep it correct. Listen, this isn't your audition to join TSM, believe it or not. So we're going to talk mainly on this episode about NA. And obviously, people are going to be like, but it's late. Well, I hope you enjoyed all the other talk shows talking about NA, because half of them don't even talk about NA, do they? They just say stuff like, haha, the finals, that was crazy. And then the worst one is that one that Kelsey does, where they literally have a list on the side, and a topic could take 30 seconds or it could take 10 minutes. There's no logic. And sometimes they literally just skip over something like, haha, you know that huge drama? Here's one person's opinion on it. Everyone else goes, I'm not wading into that with a fucking 10-foot boating on. And then they just goes to the next one. So actually, I haven't heard it discussed that much outside of the Riot broadcast, which I'll admit, they've started to do some pretty good content breaking shit down. Bizarre, I think that, now that Jack DeFisher and all them are coming on my shows. Not obliged to say that. just sort of a sellout piece of shit for doing so. So anyway, we're now going to talk a little bit about the NA playoffs. So, Abaxial, why did TSM beat Immortals?
I think Immortals were a little too impatient running a lot of their comps. I think they have team fighting problems. And yeah, I think that's most of it. Whether the comps Immortals tried to run were the best comps for them to play, that's not something we can really know. But I think we can clearly see what they were trying to do. They were trying to run stuff with a lot of globals in the early game, try and snowball from mid to a side lane, and then just work from there. And sometimes it worked, but usually they ended up throwing because they couldn't keep it together for the whole game.
Was that comparable to what you'd seen them do in the rest of the split and in the semifinals?
Yes. I mean, the big turnaround from spring to summer was Xmithy joining, Xmithy camping for Pobelter a lot, Pobelter playing just like Talia, Corki all the time, going to a side lane, and then winning the game off that. But Immortals don't seem that different from how they were playing the regular season. They don't really gank for top or bot that much, not consistently, and they don't seem to have like good game plans based off that. It's mostly just attack mid, get Pobelter free, and work from there.
So Inero, the 5th game of that series didn't happen because in 4th game, 3rd game was obviously a pretty good one for them. Or was it actually the 2nd? I think it was the 2nd that they won, and I think TSM went up 2-1, and then they won. They were about to win the 4th game. It looked like halfway in, and then they obviously made every mistake possible. TSM capitalized, won the game, right? Did the fact that we could have had a game 5, would that have made this then, beyond just the score, would it have been a close series? Was TSM's wins in the games that they won dominant enough that it's still a very convincing win for TSM? How do you take that sense of it?
I think it still would have been a close series, but I don't know. I think the series was lost in game 2 already, even though Immortals won that game. I think they pussied out after the first game. I was actually pretty pissed watching it.
In what way?
So they got that Galio J4 comp that, you know, they love to run. Like, Immortals always played really fucking good with Galio. And they end up losing the game. A lot of it, surprisingly, came down to how bot lane was played. I don't know if it was, like, Ole fucking it up in game 1. Because their shields were messing up in like every gank, and for some reason a Tristana Morgana lane was getting like killed there when they really should not have been. And if that wouldn't have happened, they would have been able to snowball this game with Galio really easily. And for some reason, they still lose that game. They go into game 2 and they have the perfect setup to be able to do the same shit again. They first pick J4 and they pussy out of it. And they go with like Kog'Maw Corki, which I think is a waste of fucking time. And they decided to do that. TSM could have shit on them in draft, but for some reason decided to take Zach and then Kassadin later on.
So what would the approach have been then? What would not pussying out have looked like in that draft?
So they first picked Jarvan. TSM did Zyra Khan, which is expected, and then they go into this random shit with Kog'Maw Corki, which I think doesn't really make sense to draft right now, especially after their first game. Tristana's not banned. They have Cassio, Orianna, Talia, Syndra all banned. I think the Syndra ban was a good adaptation by them if they want to run Galio. But instead they just completely go away from it and do Kog'Maw Corki. If they would have just done Tristana Galio, I think they have a good setup for the exact same thing. TSM can't ban enough supports to really impact the pull and bottom for Ole to like not be able to pick something there. And they would have been able to do fine. Like in the first game, other than the mistakes where Gragas somehow got ganks off on them with that lane, they were pressuring the entire time. And it was good. Like they had good pressure. Then they have Galio, who, if bot lane goes even remotely even, he's just going to eventually get opened up in mid with the way Immortals plays. And he's just going to walk bottom, or he's going to walk top, depending on however they choose to play it. And he's just going to take the turret. And they're fucked. Okay. Like TSM are gonna struggle with dealing with that, and they obviously struggle with dealing with it because even though bot lane died twice, they still lose their bot tower first. They were still getting pressured that whole time, and for some reason they go into game 2, and I guess because they lost, they pussied out and decided they weren't going to play Galio anymore, and they didn't touch it for the rest of the series. They didn't get banned or anything, and I don't know. I thought it was a really, really fucking strange move. And then TSM, like the only reason Immortals won that game, in my opinion, is just because TSM decided. just to do some random shit in draft. They pick Zach, which I think didn't need to be played, and then they take Kassadin immediately afterwards, which if they want to do Kassadin, cool. I don't think they should draft like this, though. I don't think it made much sense.
Yeah.
And they just, like, I don't know. They just end up killing themselves in draft. I don't know what happened top either, because Hanser was behind, like, really far early. I don't know if he fucked up, like, an early trade and just lost lane or some shit. But they were just screwed that game. And I don't know. I think draft just fucked them.
I mean, I think Smithy really hard denied topside in terms of, like, he went top and then he got vision there. And ended up, I think, yeah, he did do an early gank as well, which shouldn't have gone off. In regards to the Galio, I just felt like the entire game, yeah, sure, historically Immortals have played Galio well, but like they didn't actually get to make a play with Galio. And because there would be something that was triggered beforehand, and Galio ults were mostly used reactively, like topside, where Smithy would like engage over the wall before the rest of the team had caught up, and then he would have to ult reactively instead of like actually setting up the play. Yeah. So I think that was probably why. It wasn't just that they screwed up bot, it was like they were really off with how they were playing Galio that day.
Sure. Regarding the Galio pick, well, the first bad Galio ult in that game was on the second bot dive. So Immortals, it wasn't perfect, but they generally did what they wanted to do, which is, get Galio freed up, use that to pressure bot. And the first time they did that, they got bot turret to 20% health. And then, ideally they just want to repeat that again. And then after that, Immortals bot lane, they win a big trade. They're pushing forward. They just need to kill the wave, and then they're going to get the turret. But then Cody Sun decides to jump forward. And then Galio is like, okay, I got to ult and save this guy. And it turns into Immortals trying to dive without minions. So that's an even trade. They don't get a turret. And then right after that, Smithy's going mid. Smithy wants to try and free up Galio because, either they just want Galio to get free again, or they're going to try to kill Syndra. Syndra used summoners in that bot fight. So, Smithy going to mid is reasonable and correct. But then Cody and Ole start trying to hit the turret bot before that happens, and then they just get ganked and die. So that's two cases where it looks like Cody and Ole are just getting, a little too trigger happy, and but Immortals had the right idea overall for the game plan. That's pretty much all I can say about the Galio. I think after that, the game was basically over. TSM got the bot turret when Ole and Cody trolled, and then their comp just outscaled. I mean, Galio is just basically an early game champion. You try to win your side lanes early, and then if you don't do that, then you just kind of lose because he doesn't do as much in team fights.
And I think with Tristana, that is somewhat mitigated to an extent, just because of how useful Tristana is late game, and like how difficult it is to keep her out of the fight and how much free hitting she can get. So to his point, I do agree with the weird fall off in Tristana priority a little bit. It was strange to me from Immortals' side.
So before the game, people painted it in really broad strokes. Like Immortals their win condition is like win the game early, parlay that into winning the game. Hopefully don't have mid to late game team fights, because it's going to be tough if you're not ahead. From the actual games and the way they played out, was that the right outlook to have going in?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think judging by how the other games ended up playing out, where they would have like a big lead. I think it was game 3 where they played Jinx. They had a pretty good lead, and it's not like their comp was necessarily even going to be shit later on in the game, and they still couldn't close. Immortals have always generally been fundamentally they have the right idea. They just kind of fuck up executing things sometimes. So I think later on in the game, if they're playing like that, they're going to run into issues because they'll screw up executing it. And if you screw up in late game the smallest amount, you're screwed. The game can be over like that. And early on in the game, I don't know. I think that was their best shot. And from watching game 1, you could tell they had the right idea with a lot of stuff. They would just mess it up. And I think they should have just kept trying because they were screwed otherwise.
For me, a really big example is I think Immortals have a different understanding of when side lanes are good for them. and when TSM do, and also just either that or they are just really confident in, it's either that or they're really confident that they'll make the play work, because they have a tendency to, like, regardless of what they're doing, just slow push the side waves or stack the minions in the side waves. So if you're playing against TSM and TSM are behind, like, they'll always kind of get that XP. And they won't lose XP if you're just constantly stacking sideways. And the only way that this will work is if you make a play mid or you make a play on Baron and you get the ace, you get the Baron, and then you have the big wave to carry for, like, the minion push with the Baron buff. Like, that would be a case where it's good to set up the slow push. But for them, it just felt like indiscriminately, especially in game 1, they were setting up a slow push every time. And then, like, TSM just had a really easy time of, okay, we have all this time in the world to respond to the slow push. We can get the wave, and then suddenly, like, we're competitive in farm, we have items, and we have a competitive team fighting comp. We can take this fight that Immortals are trying to play.
Okay. So obviously, that regardless of what you think of the other games, Game 4 was the egregious one, because in the scenario of where we want to do well in the early game, for about, what was it, 15, 20 minutes, almost everything couldn't have gone better, right? They were like 11 kills up or something. It seemed like everything was going their way. What do you think went wrong?
Okay, so this one's very clear. Ole does not retreat well. He walks too far from his carries on Alistar. And so when they engage, he's not in position to either put that person off or try and hit the backline and interrupt what the backline's going to try and do. So instead, he was like, half a screen, not half a screen, but significantly far away. So, I mean, Vincent was good on those engages, but he got him for free.
Is that an example of something that is uncharacteristic? And in the rest of the split, when everyone was like, he's a potential MVP, he didn't do that? Or was that tendency already there? Do you think was it like rattled in the finals what made it happen? Is it something you'd seen before?
No, I think, yes, Immortals were never that good at team fighting during the split, but it's not at all surprising that they hadn't worked on it, okay? So Immortals are a younger team. They, were facing relegations in the first split, almost went there. So they switched jungle and coach, right? They need to, focus more on the short term. What's gonna make them win? And that was, okay, now we're gonna have this early game style. We're gonna play really aggressively. Ole's gonna roam a lot, blah blah. And it worked. In fact, it worked really well. They were like the best team. But something that can happen if you have really good early game, speaking from experience here, is that sometimes other teams don't keep up for a bit, and then you don't work on much else. So Immortals were winning everything in early game, or winning with long-range pickoffs later in the game, Jarvan, Talia, Bard, this or that. And so they never had to win with a team fight. And the few series that they did have to team fight, okay, maybe they lose or they, just barely win. And okay, but if you don't get many chances to practice team fighting, then you're not going to develop it that much. You can try to, say, okay, if we weren't ahead or they didn't screw up, we would have to do this, we'd have to make this change, but that's not always easy. Not every player does well with that kind of teaching. And especially if Immortals, we're going just for the short term, what makes us win now? I can see why they wouldn't develop team fighting that much. I don't think this means Song is a bad coach or anything like that. I'm sure he knows plenty about team fighting, right?
Sure. The thing is, though, people's expectation from a Korean coach, first of all, I can tell you from knowing Koreans in a lot of games, they do tend to have that approach of if something works, you just keep doing it, basically. I could see that playing into it to some degree, but obviously people to some degree revere Koreans and think that they should, in theory, have, here's an aspect that I will say is true. One of the reasons why certain people in the community, who I won't name, never sort of rated Loco Doko so highly as a coach is they knew that he had an inside pipeline, basically, to talk to certain Korean players all the time and kind of keep up to date on the Korean metagame, and then in theory at the time, when it was less advanced coaching in the West, just sort of implement some of that a little bit into his own team. So people's sense should be that you have an advantage if you're a Korean coach. Now, admittedly, communication issues, I don't know what those are like, but how much of this comes down to since you can't know how much of it is directly coaching, do you think some of these players just couldn't do what they would have needed to be a good team fighting team?
Well, I mean, okay, did Cody misposition team fights? Did Pobelter also screw up a few times? Yeah. I think in game 3, Cody just walked into an Ori ulted like the Elder Dragon team fight, and it just like...
Am I wrong that in game 4, he almost mispositioned like permanently? Like in every team fight, anytime he attacked, he was like instantly deleted. It's almost like he didn't know he was the AD carry, you know?
Okay. Well, if you really want the rant, then...
Come on.
In game 2... okay, Doublelift played super well this game. I think Doublelift had probably the best game of the series in game 2. And here he hit Shire Root on both Kog'Maw and Corki. And good job. That's great. But Pobelter shouldn't have been there. But what happened with Cody is that his W ran out on Kog'Maw. And what you need to do if you're going to play Kog'Maw is you need to know that timer really well, because he walked forward right as Doublelift went for it. And then, he was already kind of standing on like 1 or 2 feathers anyways. He was like, yeah, playing it risky. But like he walked forward at that moment and got hit by all 3, like for sure. And then he died. Very simple. I think Altec made the same mistake in the gauntlet as well against FlyQuest. You can see there was a team fight where his W ran out, and rather than like, okay, just like, I got to play safe now, I'm on Kog'Maw. Just don't die while your W is on cooldown. He instead like walked forward and tried to finish the guy, and then he died in that team fight as well. So you really got to have like full mastery of the champion to play it like that.
Okay. Does anyone have any defense of Cody Sun in this series? Like was it like? Listen, by the way, it is his first final, but at the same time, I've always kind of been someone who subscribes to the logic that, except for very rare circumstances, if you can make a final, in theory, it should be possible to win it.
I do think in terms of AD carries and young ones specifically, there is more of a growth in terms of positioning to an extent over time. I think for me, though, the defense of Cody Sun is less that, like, there were a lot of situations where I feel like Immortals didn't really necessarily have to take some of the fights they took, or they had a lot of situations where it felt like they were really forcing because they felt like they were running out of time. And theoretically, I think they drafted in situations where they didn't necessarily need to take every time, or they didn't necessarily need to feel like they were running out of time. It just like got to a point where, like for example, in the game 4 where you're pushing on this turret because you feel like your Lucian gets completely outscaled and you're done, and then you greed really hard and you just don't need to be positioned this far forward in general. Or like you don't know when to group mid versus like send Cody Sun to a side lane, and then Cody Sun is suddenly in a side lane and TSM are on top of you because they just pushed out side lanes and you don't know where they are. So I think that there are a lot of situations like that where they just didn't need to be in that position, just straight up. So like that would be my defense of Cody Sun, is that like, yeah, INTZ have team fighting problems, but why were they team fighting then, I guess?
Because I've got a question for you.
Okay, I got something on that.
Okay, come on then.
Okay, so I want everyone's opinion on this, because I think game 1, game 2, game 4, even if you don't agree with the way Immortals were doing things, it seems reasonable, like you can understand what they were trying to draft. But game 3, I really hated their comp. So this is the game they played Shen, Tamkench, Corki. And that's something that's really annoying to play against because they have a global from every lane. Tam and Shen are really good at saving people. But it also scales like crap for just like the team fighting part if you're going to play like these slower, like front-to-front team fights. So why did they pick that with Jinx? They first rotation Jinx, and yet they still went to like the Shen, Tam, Kench. They still had the mentality like, okay, we need to have like a whole bunch of globals. Okay, let's pick a global in every lane, but let's also try to have good team fighting with the Jinx. That was the game. I just didn't feel they picked like a cohesive, logical comp. What are your opinions on this?
And I think you picked Jinx to match the Tristana in this situation. If I recall correctly, that's what they picked it into.
Yeah.
You pick it with the Tahm Kench. That's because like in situations where you're swapping or where you're playing sideline comps, like it's really hard to match Tristana in trades or pushes in those cases. I think Jinx is one of those few champions that can sort of do that. So if they're playing like a 1-3-1 setup, I also think that Jinx is fairly safe when she has Tahm Kench. So if you're playing with sideliners like Corki, Shen, necessarily you don't like have to team fight. You can still set up a situation where you're just clearing mid really fast. You have Tahm Kench for safety. And then if you need to be in a team fight situation, you have like the protection and the positioning from Jarvan, Jarvan's ultimate. And Corki also scales super well in team fight situations and can self-position, so you don't have to solely rely on the Jinx in that case. You have the Shen ultimate for like Corki in general, so I don't think it was that bad of a draft or that bad of a comp in theory. Like I can see where you have some issues with it, but I didn't necessarily have a big problem with their game 3 picks.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of AD carry bans again, or at least like standard AD carry. So Kog'Maw's gone, Kallista's gone. They first picked Tristana. So generally teams are going to like Xayah at that point. Like it's between Xayah, Trist, TSM take Trist away. So like normally you would kind of expect teams to default to Xayah, I guess. And eventually in the 4th game, they take Xayah when it's just Xayah Trist up. So, I mean, he obviously plays it. I guess he just thought at that point that it was something that they wanted to try. Maybe they had some practice on it and they thought it was like a cheesy pick that could work. But, I mean, I don't think it was too awful. I don't think having Xayah in that situation would have necessarily made like the game any easier for them at all. I think it's like an acceptable pick to do, and maybe it's just something he's comfortable on. But it wasn't anything too crazy, but it did kind of seem like Cody was doing like an ADC lottery this whole series. Like he played one of everything pretty much, right? He played a different AD carry every game.
Okay, as a naive outsider who may well be wrong on everything, may not know anything whatsoever, but has the fucking motherfucking mic right now, I just want to ask this, okay? Mm-hmm. So, I actually never really understood. Like, to me, Cody Sun was a perfect example of the player that exists in every LCS split, who just was so bad in the past that when they get half decent, people want to be like, oh, congratulations, you really improved. You know, you're not just good. In fact, now I'm going to go the other way. Now I see this stock sort of trending. I think it's going to the top. I'm riding it all the way up. And you know what? I'm saying now you're good, so that then if you're really good next split, I'm in first. So I always used to watch his games and people were like, he's improved so much. And I was like, well, he was literally probably the worst LCS AD carry I ever saw pre-season. And yeah, now he's like competent. But then I look at the rest of the team, I'm like, first of all, they've got a way better jungler. Secondly, they've got a new coach. And thirdly, the best player in his lane is the support, who apparently now was integrated into the team. Wasn't having the problems he was having in the spring split. So I never really understood why an AD carry in a team that doesn't really team fight was ever getting the props. I mean, it's not like he smashes lane so hard they never need to team fight. Like, if you get to the end of the game and you have team fights and your AD carry isn't doing anything like killing people, then either surely your jungler and support suck dick, or the top laner can't tank. Like, to me, Pobelter's a pretty well-rounded player, seems to know what he's doing most of the time. Was this guy actually a good AD carry?
Okay, so I worked with Cody on Dream Team for a bit, and so his laning coming in was pretty dog shit. We lost to some pretty bad lanes starting off. But working with, like, it was Papa Chow at the time. Like, they worked together, and at first, I think he has issues getting used to the people that he's playing with, just, like, down to the type of person he is. I think he gets used to, like, a certain way to play. So when I saw him going to Immortals at the start, I kind of figured it was the same thing again with Ole. And they were just having, like, okay, it's Cody with a new support. Like, he's kind of not adjusted to it yet, because I know they were scrimming with other supports at the time, too, since Ole, like, wasn't in the country yet, I guess, like, due to visa stuff. So Ole comes in, and then they play, and I think he was only there for like a week or two beforehand. So they played pretty shit at the start. So with him being slower to adjust to new people, I think that made him look really bad in his first split. And now that he's doing, like, him and Ole are obviously, they should be adjusted by now. It's been fucking months. Now that they're playing together so much, like, his laning's not as bad anymore. So I think it is kind of that effect of, yeah, he actually was kind of looking so bad at the start, and now that he looks acceptable, people think, like, yeah, he's really fucking good. I think give him more time, he'll be all right. Like, he'll be a pretty solid guy, but he's still fairly inconsistent with stuff, and that's just I don't know. I think it's down to him being a bit of a rookie.
Like I'm not someone, like, I'll be honest, people are not going to believe this. I'm not someone who thinks, like, let's get a hate train going and go hard on this guy. And obviously, listen, it was the finals, and it's not like he was playing just an average team fight. He was playing one of the better team fighting teams in NA. But with that said, like, I do hate the people who think League of Legends is a game where you remove the nameplates and you're like, oh, the champion, Xayah, is doing really well. It's like, shut the fuck up. Who's playing it? And against who? Like, that... It's, at the end of the day, you have to evaluate player performance as well.
Right, we just want the truth. I mean, like, he's an average ADC now. I think he's got decent mechanics. I watched his stream a little bit. I mean, he's decent at clicking, but, he doesn't really know his limits that well yet. I wouldn't say he's, like, insane mechanically, but he's okay. He can be better. But he's just an average ADC right now. It's not amazing, not terrible.
So people highlighted already some of Ole's issues, which, I mean, again, they were also noticeable, especially in that fourth game. Like, somehow he managed to do simultaneously what you said, never be in position to actually sort of like peel people off his AD carry. Yet simultaneously, the reason he had to get in those positions is because he took so much damage on the way out of a fight that was about to begin 5 minutes later. It's like, I don't know what was going on there. Were there any other players in general? Was it beyond the team aspect? Were there other players who you thought misplayed the series? Anyone?
I think Immortals had some inefficiency. I think, in particular, the part that almost caused him to throw the second game was that they disagreed on a red buff invade, or like red buff invade versus dive top. Smithy was in the middle of doing the red buff invade, whereas Flame and Pobelter are like, go now on the top dive. So I'm not sure if that's just like the language barrier or something like that, but that one was pretty egregious. And in fact, I thought after that TSM would win, but then they just like played completely awful afterwards, and then just did a whole bunch of stupid stuff. But I thought otherwise, Flame and Xmithy were fairly good throughout the series. Pobelter was respectable. I think Pobelter didn't know his distance in team fights that well, but again, he's probably not practiced on it, as Immortals aren't practiced on it. So
should they have tried to put Flame on Cho'Gath?
Not really. I think top jungle 2v2 was one of their brighter spots in this set, and I think Cho'Gath's a pick where you just kind of want to play like an isolated 1v1 top. You just kind of want to get vision for it, and it just kind of like sits there. You can counter gank for Cho'Gath, but you don't want to actively gank or initiate dives a lot of the time. Okay, you can dive with Cho'Gath, but like still, it's not like we're always going aggressive for the Cho'Gath lane. It's just more like we're gonna play elsewhere. Cho'Gath just kind of does his thing after I get vision for him. Similarly, even if you play like some other top lane carry picks, if you play like a Kennen, that's also a pick where you don't necessarily actually dive top. It's more just like get vision for it, let it do its thing, and then we're not going to actually play 2v2 around it. Whereas I think Immortals, the way they want to play is more like, let's fight. We're not going to be patient.
Actually, I kind of disagree. I think game 3, because you did talk about the draft and stuff. I think there were moments that were a little weird, like the fact that they had, like Smithy went for a really deep gank top, and then Flame ends up using TP, right? On that ward there in the bush, and then like 2 minutes later he's using his ult bot, and then they have to do this weird swap where Jinx goes top to catch the wave and stuff like this, because obviously Flame like just burned his ult and his TP like super late and for things that weren't going to work out. So I think that was actually a really big problem for them in game 2, especially since I think a lot of times Immortals were most successful when the game sort of culminated into this like everyone is bot sort of situation early, and then they got there first. And so when you're kind of screwing up that play as top and jungle, you're in a position where you're as Immortals, you're losing kind of a key element that gets you ahead early.
Maybe, but didn't they just get that from Pobelter? Like they didn't need like to necessarily win top in order to do that? Or... You
mean this particular play? Like I remember Pobelter also left mid and then lost waves mid, like doing this play as well. if I recall correctly, and they didn't necessarily get the kill. You mean the topside player, or do you mean the ult bottom? Because the ult bottom was just like really late, and there was nothing he could do anyway.
My memory eludes me, but I don't think like the trade sides in that game were very logical or very like.
Yeah, I mean,
good.
Like this is.
I think it was just like trade, just like whatever.
I guess this for me, the fundamental thing is like, yeah, we can talk about the players misplaying at the end of the day, but I think there are just like a lot of really questionable team-wide decisions that were bad in these games as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the worst ones. I mean, Immortals had bad team fighting. I think something that really bothered me about TSM in Game 2 was that they weren't looking for counter tempo. Like when they would make a mistake, they initiated a fight mid, and then Jarvan is roaming down, flame on Jarvan, so they initiated a bad fight. They lost that fight, but then they just tried to defend for the next like 2 or 3 minutes and got picked off instead of like trying to look for something on counter tempo, trying to like say, okay, you're going to get our mid T1, but we're going to do something else. Instead, like Immortals literally ignored top wave for 3 minutes while flame grouped, and TSM only had a Rift Herald for that. And that really bothered me because they just didn't accept their mistake. And that's, at least Immortals, when they made mistakes, they would just kind of, well, they didn't even make that many macro mistakes because, they were in the driver's seat most of the time. I think TSM was the one with the kind of bad reaction to what Immortals were doing. I
mean, I think they did make macro mistakes, right? Like some of them were things.
Well, of course they did.
Yeah. Of like even with a lead, right? I feel like Immortals are going, oh, okay, we are really far ahead. If TSM are backing here, if we delay our back, we can get this Infernal Drake. But then like you get the Infernal Drake and then you back and TSM get complete jungle control on bot side and everything else. And they can actually really, really pressure and get a lot out of that if they work on it. And there were just like a lot of issues where I felt like Immortals with the lead felt like they had to get more stuff before they reset.
Okay, I have one question on these lines.
It's fair. Okay.
So the most pivotal play, which looked like a little bit borderline, you could say, was the one where they got a kill. Wasn't it even on Haunter when it was at like the dead inhibitor? And then they had a 5v4, and then they went to try and do the Baron, and then they got the Baron, and then then Olay did that like engage out of the brush behind the Baron, at which point they just lost that fight super badly, and then, well, there was in Game 4, by the way, and then it looked like it was downhill all the way from there. Do you remember this one? Where they could have kept pushing, or they could just back completely, but they decided we can get a Baron, and it looked... The problem with this play was, it wasn't like they instantly made the decision. Like, Olay set up the whole time to be in this brush. This is what he wanted to do. He wanted to engage out, and it's almost like they thought in their... As an idiot, as an outsider, it's almost like they thought in their brain, if we do this, we'll get the Baron. But they never thought to themselves, we'll get the Baron, but we'll be on a team fight with like 2 of us with half health afterwards,
I think they fall into stuff like that really easy because I think they use, like when they get Barons, they use it pretty poorly. Like was said before, their wave management is not the best at all. And you can just watch how a team uses waves when they get Baron, and it can be really easy to just see it then because it's really obvious how they use their like side waves when you have Baron. And Immortals have never really gotten huge advantages off of getting Baron, and it usually takes them at least like 2 Barons to actually end a game unless the other team kills themselves. Like in Game 2, they got Baron, and then they just managed to end the game despite the fact they fuck up their waves because TSM just hard commits like, all right, boys, let's fight. And then they go in, they die, and they're like, okay, well, game's over. Because I guess they accept the fact that they were probably going to lose that game anyway, so they just wanted to try. But Immortals didn't do anything special. So when they run into these situations, I think they're like they feel pressured. They need to get more than just what they got out of it because they're not comfortable actually closing a game correctly off of how to use waves, because it's hard to fucking end a game if you don't know how to use waves. And I think if you play something like Lucian, it's really hard to end the game if you don't know how to use waves, because you're short range AD carry. You can't just walk up and hit the turret. Like, you have to pull people away, and I think they really struggle with that, so they just try to get too much to overcompensate for it, really.
Okay. Let's draw a distinction here between sort of big picture macro, like what you're generally trying to do, and some of the more detail oriented stuff, like, okay, are we going to set up all the waves all the time? Are we going to, how are we going to use our vision here? How many times does the support need to reset this and that? I think Immortals are okay at the first one, like the big picture stuff. I agree with they suck on most of the details. Whether you want to count that as a detail or a big picture thing at all, that's a different story. In this meta, perhaps some of the things that should be big picture are more sort of sifted to details because, you know, you can just team fight your way out of stuff a lot of the time. But I think they have a decent idea of what they want to do generally. But sure, like, could they be better on a lot of these details? Absolutely. Everyone flames like the Gragas gank on bot where he didn't black shield in game 1. But the only reason Gragas got there was because they didn't deport his jungle properly.
Yeah, they didn't ward
they tossed 3 wards in there, and none of them saw Gragas just walk from base to red to the bot.
And if they had just worded that Smithy was like trading for topside and he was getting that farm, and he probably could have gotten contested Raptors as well, theoretically, if he just wasted time ganking bottom. So yeah, it would have been like super good, and it was actually a desperation play by Spence Garen because it should have been worded. So yeah.
Okay. Inero, what did TSM do really well in this final?
Really well in it. I think when they actually got leads, the way they managed to close games, I think TSM actually uses waves fairly well compared to a lot of LCS teams. I think a lot of teams in NA really are honestly awful at it. So TSM can abuse people really easily with that, and I think they managed to close games off it well. I think in terms of drafting, other than game 2, their drafts were fine. I think they were doing well at just setting up what they needed. Like even in game 1, they had Syndra into the Galio comp. I think Syndra's a very good pick into Galio comps because Galio can't ult the target that Syndra wants to hit. Otherwise, they're playing the Galio comp wrong. So I think in terms of like drafting, other than game 2 and the way they manage waves, they did pretty well with that. I think they still have issues with Sven doing typical Sven stuff. I think it still popped up. He loves to invade when he shouldn't be and getting picked and making their lives really hard. But I think with the way the jungle meta is right now, that kind of gets covered up a bit. It's a lot harder for him to go in and die as it was when it was just carry junglers. So I think they weren't too bad overall on those points. And luckily they're just in a meta that favors the whole Sven thing being a non-factor.
Vincent and Peter are actually playing pretty well right now. I hope they carry that into Worlds because, you know, I've been like a lot more lukewarm on them earlier, but I think they're in good form right now, and you know, hopefully they can keep up and perhaps even win against some of these international bot lanes. I think for some of TSM's weaknesses, this is like a decent meta for them. I don't think their, you know, weaknesses are going to be shown that much, or going to matter that much at Worlds. So that's it's pretty good.
Okay. So in the final game of the final, seemed again as an outsider, it seemed like Biofrost got a lot of clutch ultimates off. Was that as significant as it looked?
What was he playing? He was playing Rakan, right? Yeah, like when he's playing Rakan, like I think he's been doing really well, but it's also pretty easy to look good on Rakan. I think he's just one of those flashy supports. Like he fucking glows when he goes in, so everyone looks at it and it looks great. Right? It's pretty easy to look good. I don't think he was necessarily doing anything too special. He was just being your typical Rakan player.
Well, it's an instant ult. I mean, like when you have your ult and your W, like you just hit them. And there's like not much counterplay. At least they're nerfing the radius on that a little bit now, which is good. But you know, sure, you know, I think it's one of the easier supports to play. I mean, it's still got like some higher skill cap stuff you can do, but people are praising Lemonation's Rakan.
Yeah,
good
you know, I'm not convinced it's like that hard of a champion to play. I think
it's just easy Alistar. Like it's really just Alistar, but a whole lot easier to play. So you don't have to be too mechanically great to look great when you get that play. So it's really hard to say that he did anything too great in that.
It's also one of those champions that makes it like it kind of snowballs the situation because it's also really hard to like set up vision against Rakan because he can like instantly do this engage, and then so a lot of times Rakan teams will have like better vision than you, and you can set up picks more easily. So it just like it's one of those situations where I don't know. It's really strong, and I think it took a while for people to figure out exactly like how to play it and how to set up for it. But now it's just kind of taking everything over.
Well, sure. People used to think Rakan was pretty bad in lane, but now it's actually turning out. You know, you can pick like say Hakan Tristana, and you actually win most of your lanes. In fact, that's kind of what I believe Cloud9 were doing in the gauntlet. It's just like, he's got a heal, he's got range. He actually wins most of these lanes. You can play like Alistair and you'll say you'll counter him later, but he actually still wins the lane, and he's still pretty good anyways. So, yeah.
So when you have as many NA LCS trophies as Bjergsen has, people are going to assume you must be very good in the LCS finals. Was Bjergsen actually very good in this series?
I think the fact that I can't instantly say yes just makes me think that mid honestly didn't matter too much. Like, I actually
the
feel
implication
like
of this meta, right?
I think
Okay.
there was
So, okay. So, I did see one really bad mistake from him in game 4. What I saw in game 4 is that Bjergsen overstayed for a wave. Might have been preventable had he called Dennis mid, and then they would have he would have helped him get that wave pushed together. But yeah, that let Lucian go mid for free. That let Immortals get a really, really big bot dive, and without any counterplay from TSM. And so that game almost snowballed out of control until TSM managed to find that comeback. So other than that, he got picked off a lot in game 3, but he also got the game-winning Ori ult on Cody. So yeah, I thought his cast in game 2 was good, but not good enough. I don't think any level of good would have been enough to carry that game. Game 1 was average. So I think Soren had a decent performance, but not great by his standards. You can expect a lot from him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who was the MVP of this series then?
I mean, I don't know. I guess the MVP would just be whoever the fuck is shot calling. It didn't really feel like anyone actually really mattered too much in this. Like, most of the games seemed to be decided off of someone getting picked off, trying to rotate around. Like, game 3 was it? Yeah, game 3, Immortals, okay, they have a lead. They Smithy gets picked, moving to get mid priority, sneaking between it, and the rest of the team doesn't follow him. I'm not gonna say anyone on TSM carried that game to get a win. It's just, this guy popped up and killed himself, right? So I don't know. It didn't seem like anyone is really a huge pop-off player in this.
When you're losing
I think you
games,
can give it to Vincent.
I mean, sure. When you're losing games after taking tier 2 turrets, it's not really something that the winning team hard carried, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, they lost after taking 2 inhibs, so.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to be really mean, you could say that Cody Sun was the MVP, but it's probably also
the MVP at some team. So. Okay, here's a question then. Inero, someone who currently holds a job coaching in LCS, though no one knows yet what happens next year. But right now, still holds a job. Okay. This is not the moment where we're going to have a long discussion about who's the better player, Flame or Haunter, and I'm going to give up. First of all, I'd do that on my own video, just get very egotistical in that sense. But I want to know this: in this series, do you think Haunter played better than Flame?
No, I didn't get to see things like what happened in the game 2, where Renekton is getting tower dove by J4 and Sejuani at level 3. I think that's pretty indicative of Renekton fucking up somehow in lane, which I think is pretty unacceptable. And I know how we were saying a bit earlier, it seemed like top lane matchups weren't really going the way you'd kind of expect them to. So I think Flame was doing better in lane, but I mean, we don't really get to see it too often, right?
Sure.
So I think Flame was playing better, but it's top didn't matter really at all.
Okay.
It just kind of mattered which team was playing better.
I think I think Kevin and Dennis are not as good as they should be in 2v2. I think that's all I really want to say. But, and I don't think that's going to be a problem at Worlds. I don't think it really matters that much in this meta, and I don't think it's not every team needs to be or should try to be good at everything, right?
Sure.
But I think, if you want to criticize that, you could see their synergy was kind of off during this final.
Okay.
I think, there are a couple of things. I think Immortals generally took the good approach of trying to get mid counterpick when they could, because I feel like TSM get sort of a lot out of having mid pressure. Just like little things like understanding when you, assuming you can go get the ward, even though you don't know where the enemy jungle is because mid has pressure and the enemy jungler can't necessarily do anything. Or just like when you gank top, like you'll have mid can't necessarily come and you can't necessarily 3-man top if Bjergsen has mid pressure. And I think that things like that affected the game a lot in small ways. I also think that, just game one right away, Hanser, I think by himself was losing trades in like the Gnar Cho'Gath matchup. And that shouldn't really happen. Like Inero said, that there were matchups that weren't going as expected or as predicted.
Okay. Is Hanser the best NA top liner?
I don't think so.
Do you mean like best as in best domestic NA top laner, or
no,
best playing
best
NA?
Playing in the NA LCS?
No.
Who's better?
I would say Someday. I think Someday puts Dignitas on his back. I think Dignitas has lots of issues to actually have to cover up with. They fixed it slightly when they got a new bot lane, but it kind of relies on Someday carrying. And you'll see that like, even if he's playing Maokai top, they fucking camp Maokai top, get him huge to snowball the game when it doesn't matter. He was the only person throwing like constant bans too, I think.
Wasn't it so sad to see in the gauntlet that like he is like 2-0-4 on Renekton, just like top side of the map is just over. He's up like 50 CS or something like that. And then like somehow Dignitas can't win. Somehow they all just have to like suicide bot and just like turn everything awful.
Yeah.
Wasn't that just sad?
I think he's in like kind of a Lyra situation where he was like the shining star on a team that's kind of just dragging it along.
So then why did it also go? Let's shift this to talk about Gauntlet then. So that was obviously like the first round of the matchup. How did a team, Dignitas, that some people thought had a shot to beat TSM, spiral into lose to TSM, lose to CLG, and then go and lose the Gauntlet? How did this happen?
Okay, so I like to look at the FlyQuest one because this was hilarious. They for some reason sit on top lane and try to punish Balls when who gives a shit if Balls is behind? Like he's likely going to be behind anyways. Just looking through his performance throughout the split, I think you can look at it and say like, okay, our top lane's going to win. We have arguably like the best top laner in NA right now playing top, and then Balls, who's like near the bottom end of it, right? He should be winning on his own. Just get him a matchup. Like it doesn't even matter sometimes if you get Someday a good matchup. He usually just wins the lane. Let him do his thing and go bottom, but for some reason they kept going top. So FlyQuest just wins through playing a bot lane, and they drafted so that they had like good bot lane matchups and they played to it, and then they just win. And Dig just keeps doing the same thing. So I don't know. I think they had very weird decisions. I also think that outside of TSM and Immortals, I think the rest of the teams in NA are really kind of just not good in comparison at all. And it's just a toss-up. It feels like every series is a toss-up, really. And I don't know. Dignitas just makes weird decisions, and they're just like a one-threat team, really. I mean, Alltech, Adrian are helping it, but even then, it depends on if they actually play to it, since so much relies on jungle and mid, who aren't necessarily doing the best all the time. So,
well, I think Keen is better than he used to be, but there is certainly that question that like, oh, did Alltech and Adrian show up for the playoffs? Did they show up for the gauntlet? It does look like, they played differently, but we can't really know. Cop was pretty tight-lipped in an interview. He's just like, I think we didn't work hard enough, or that was it.
What does that even mean?
Oh yeah. So
that's like my old favorite one was we weren't prepared enough, which by the way never means like this isn't like season 2. That doesn't mean like we were in Carbo like fucking drinking all the time and then we came back one day early like shit. Was it LCS tomorrow? No, we didn't prepare enough. Just means like if I could go back in time and tell them not to do that stuff they did, I'd do that. Like it's the worst coaching excuse ever. Everyone has the same amount of time to prepare.
Yeah. Could
Dignitas actually have done anything differently? Obviously, like not something like very niche and very detailed. Is there like a broad stroke that they fucked up?
I think Generally speaking, I think that Dignitas were having success with the lineup that they put together and has some definite positive points. But then as soon as they run into trouble, they had trouble solving it, or they kind of collapsed, as if they expected like this sort of roster change to just carry them all the way through and not to have any sort of issues. And then they just didn't really address anything. So I think that that's a big problem that seemed to occur.
So like, I think even with this, that they could have still possibly ran the gauntlet, since like C9 got through. They went 3-1 against C9. I think if they would have just not made this weird decision against FlyQuest, they could have ran it, and they could have been the third team at Worlds. But just really weird decision. I think they can't afford to make those weird decisions, because I think they have a pretty big liability in mid lane, and sometimes even jungle. Like, I like Shrimp, but the fuck, man, guy's a little weird with farming and then champion picks and decisions he makes.
So Dignitas lost to FlyQuest, and then this, for me, it'll sound like a very abstract point, but this to me tells you if someone either just thinks memes are actually a way to live your life and not just the occasional joke, or B, really actually is a child and believes in fairy stories. Because people who believe in fairy stories actually thought this meant FlyQuest was going to win the gauntlet, even though the whole point of why it's amazing that they did it when Cloud9 had High as a jungler is because of how unlikely that is. So the children in the world were like, oh good, now High will win all the series because shot calling or something. But obviously CLG, with a guy who's like a brand new jungler, won the series. So what do you actually make from FlyQuest from the gauntlet? Like, did they improve from what they did in the regular season?
I'll let Inero take that in a second, but like, I want to give a spiel real fast about High. And I was watching something you did with Prolly a while back. Prolly was talking about the High, Cloud9 and all that stuff. And there was a distinction that I think he was trying to make between, I'll call it macro and coordination. Okay. Right. Let's say macro is when you have, it's like, what's your next objective? What do you think the steps are in order to do that? Coordination is how well everyone does that together, and like, do they do that to the best of their ability? And I think the point he was trying to make is that Cloud9 weren't actually good at macro and deciding what objectives they're going to take, like how do they think their comp should win the game. But they were good at, they would do whatever High said. Right. They would execute it
at that exact second.
Yeah. So I think here we kind of saw that too, where, okay, FlyQuest had decent execution on some team fights, but I think in terms of macro, nothing was going on in the Dig FlyQuest series. Barely anything was going on in the CLG series. And then the C9 CLG series, we actually saw real macro. We actually saw like regular League of Legends again. But I don't think FlyQuest have good macro at all. Anything that would indicate that they would be an international class team. I think Jason has an issue with talking to the rest of the team about his pressure. Something I hope he fixes. He didn't fix it when I was on TSM.
He means well told, by the way.
Jason, like, he does well in communication in a lot of ways, but something he doesn't say is, "Oh, I need your help. I need help pushing. Like, come to me," which is, you know, ADCs are very independent. He also doesn't say, "I'm pushing. Don't fight." So this results in something we saw very often during this series, which is that either Wild Turtle will get caught in the side lane, pushed up super far, or they would just fight mid without him. And FlyQuest won against Dignitas in spite of this. Turtle even had like a highlight reel on Reddit because of it. But I mean, this isn't the way you're supposed to play the game, right? Okay. So that's my spiel.
Yeah, I mean, with FlyQuest, I mean, I really think all you have to do is, if you have a bot lane that can punish their bot lane, which most teams likely will, you just punish their bot lane and you don't care about the rest of the map. Like, you're right about the fact that with them, they don't necessarily make like the best macro moves. Like, but the thing that's always been something people, I guess, kind of don't look at in League is that you don't always have to do the right call as long as all 5 people are actually doing it. You can sometimes have a shit call just work out because all 5 people are on the same page. If the other team is just uncoordinated and they're not ready to respond to it correctly, the wrong call can work. And that happens.
Why was Fly good in the first half of the first split, right?
Yeah. Like it happens all the time. So High gets them to do that. If he's able to micromanage people like that and they're all trusting it and they're all willing to just follow their leader in, like, cool, it's going to work out sometimes. And it did. I just think that right now they're just kind of skill capped and they shouldn't be winning games, but it just happened that for some reason Dignitas chose to play the top side when they don't need to. And it gave FlyQuest another round in the gauntlet. Like, I don't know. I love that team, but there's no reason they should have even gotten past the first round of the gauntlet. Like, I predicted they would win because, like, I'm friends with, like, Cake that's a sub for the team, and I just wanted to, like, support the underdog team, and then they actually win. I don't know. It's pretty fucked up.
The reason you are seeing me rather than the rest of the episode is that, unfortunately, internet problems made it impossible for me to continue the episode. It actually happened a couple of times during the episode, but I was able to neatly cut it together and people were able to pick up their points again. So sadly, much shorter episode than I hoped. We got through the NA LCS finals, some of the playoff aspects, a little bit of the gauntlet. We'll have to resume some of these topics or revisit them in a future episode. Being as I'm in a position where I have to fly in a few hours, I couldn't reschedule anything, but I thought it's worth getting what was available within the discussion out there because I thought we did cover some interesting points and we were able to get into some of the topics, particularly the TSM series in depth.
I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.